Hey guys. This is part 8 of What If Naruto Died and Became a Hollow. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 32, Mal. Warning! Chapters 30, 31, and 32 will have some questionable content. There was only one thing as great and terrible within the Reino animal to rival the institution of science that Naruto had installed. And that thing was the combat arena within the Reino animal. While the arena has been modeled after Barragan's own in style and architecture, the building itself served a much different purpose. For, the arena had in fact never been used to host a sporting event ever before. To the denizens of the palace, the arena stood as a looming figurehead, and many of them wondered why it was even there. While it stood deserted, several hollows maintained the job of keeping it up and running, and trespassing on the property was an offense punishable by death. So, when it was advertised that the arena would be hosting its first ever show to a classified audience of hollows, it set the hollows of the kingdom on edge. They didn't understand why Naruto was being so secretive about it, and they just prayed that wouldn't have to ever go near that place. Because if they did, they would probably be participating in some horrific event. But the denizens of the kingdom looked away as the scientists of the institution escorted these unusual beings to the arena. They didn't seem to care too much, and they probably just assumed they were just some poor hollows that Naruto had gotten his hooks into. If they stayed out of this, they would be fine. Naruto himself seemed to be leading the charge of hollows that were flooding out of the building, their captives moaning and wallowing in their misery as they were guided. Some of them weren't even aware of what was going on, their minds having been completely destroyed by the experiments. They had already reached the area where they were supposed to go, the great gate that led into Naruto's own personal arena. Inspired by Barragan's design, it was every bit as nasty as the rival king's, and was going to be used for a far different purpose. While the guards were busy leading the former citizens of Konoha, Naruto had already ascended the stone staircase into the main body of the arena, eager to take his seat in the largest chair of the front row. Of course, spectating during this event wasn't all he was going to do. He looked over the stadium with an odd sense of satisfaction. He really had to hand it to Barragan on this one. The guy really knew how to construct a suitable arena. The design was perfect. The amount of space needed to conduct an event, perfect. There were 44 identical doors at different points in the arena, holding primed soldiers ready to battle. A modification that Naruto added otherwise was the opening floor, where the abominations would go should they survive the trials he had in store for them. And here they were coming now. With a certain number of difficulties, the excited guards led the entire village of Konoha into the center of the arena, before leaving to join their king in the stands, for they were the spectators for this grand event. The gates closed with a clang, trapping the desperate villagers within its confines, and allowing no entrance or exit from the stadium otherwise. Naruto grinned in trepidation, and as the guards filed into their personal seats, they too were eager for the carnage to begin. While some of them were disappointed they wouldn't be able to participate in the bloodshed, they didn't dare question Naruto. The Emperor was lucky. He could of course jump in the ring should he become dissatisfied with watching, and most of them knew that he probably would. I would address all of you in this situation, but it seems my words won't carry to the pathetic souls wallowing in their misery. So I'm talking to the little cunt who I left alone during the experiments, and you know who you are. Naruto spoke up, his powerful voice carrying to the ears of Kanaji. She turned her eyes away from the villagers to stare up at Naruto. I would try and stay alive as long as possible in there. If you are, say, one of the unlucky ones that doesn't make it out alive, then you'll miss the big surprise at the end of the show. Of course, with your skills, that shouldn't be much of a problem, should it? He mocked. Kanaji stared up at him blankly, her spirit too broken to respond in anything more than a feeble tone. You just think this is some kind of game, she croaked in disbelief. Naruto grinned at her. Yes, he responded simply, before he clapped his hands together loudly. The gates that surrounded the villagers opened simultaneously, in a visible replica of when he was trapped in an arena. Except this time, the roles were completely reversed, and he wouldn't be the one that was fighting for his life. He stared up a control box high up on the arena's balcony, and noticed a shadow moving behind the scenes there. Clearly it had heard his clap. He clapped again, and the traps were set in place. Across the sprawling area of the battlefield, there were spiked pits that would open at random all over the place, a few boiling pits of lava and vats of acid. There were spinning blades that would eviscerate anything that touched them, and small pitfalls that carried them to God knows where. As well as a multitude of other traps and horrors. And the twisted villagers of Konoha were about to experience it in full, as if they haven't suffered enough in their miserable lives. From out of the cages came a multitude of hollow and Aaron cars, either captured war prisoners forced to fight, or soldiers in his army that were primed and raring to get a shot at the former humans. The humans themselves seemed to notice that they were danger, and a brave young woman made for the gate, before she was cleaved through by an Aaron car. Listen, if you, any of you I should say, can survive an hour in here without getting mutilated by my forces, then I'll let you out of here. To top it all off, I'll even reverse the process on all of your precious villagers, and let you go about your lives in the human world, he said, lying through his teeth. Really? She asked, not really believing what she was hearing. Of course. I'm a hollow of my word, after all. I never go back on it. It's my Nindo after all, he said, much to the shock of Kanaji. That voice that he had said it in, it sounded so sincere, so right, so her. This was exactly the type of attitude that she herself would take on. Never going back on her word, it being her Nindo. Cut it out, Kanaji. You can't trust him at all. You saw those things that he ordered his scientists to do to the villagers. He doesn't give a rat's ass about us. He's having us butchered. We can't trust anything he says. She reprimanded herself. Whatever the case, it looked like she didn't have any other option rather than relying on his word. They would have to survive for an hour, whether this guy butchered her and the others or not. It seems you do take after me quite a bit. I haven't broken your will completely, after all. You're ready to fight to the death to gain your freedom, and the freedom of those you care about. I like it. I'll enjoy crushing that pretty little spirit of yours again, Naruto said. I can't even fight right now. It looks like I'll have to avoid and evade if I want to make it out of here alive. The guards were looking for Naruto's approval so they could begin the match. He raised his hand gaudily, before swinging it downwards, signaling the beginning of the massacre that they had long awaited to start. The bloodshed was everywhere. The hollows and Arankar tore into the abominations with claws and swords. Kanaji wanted to vomit at the scene, but she was forced to hold her luncheon when a sword almost sheared off her entire head. She just barely managed to duck under it, avoiding the Arankar who was wielding the blade by running clumsily over to the other side of the arena. Since the floor was almost half a mile long, she was getting winded very fast. Wait, she scanned the area. Other than a hollow or two taking the time to attack her, most of them were focused with tormented someone else. That meant that they weren't paying any attention to her. She noticed the gates where the hollows had poured out of, seeing that they had a severe lack of activity within them. That's it. Naruto saw the girl enter the open gate, hiding from her tormentors. He whistled slightly, acknowledging the girl's tactic. That would up her chances of surviving, if he wasn't going to go down there and flush her out. Pretty clever, I must admit. These hollows and Arankar are too absorbed in their battle to notice a straggler like her. But unfortunately for her, I want her to live through this, Naruto thought out loud, before he swung himself over the barricade and into the arena. Well, it looks like it's about time for little Naruto to participate in this event. I can't let them hog all the fun. And so, the Emperor darted throughout the battlefield, slicing at any Konoha villager with his Zanpakuto, pushing them into traps, and making sure they were completely miserable. Of course, he did want a fair number of them to survive for the finale. It had already been 18 minutes since the beginning, and he could hardly wait for it to be unveiled. Naruto mused about maybe flushing the girl out of her hiding spot for shits and giggles, but decided against it in the long run. It would be best to leave her for the very end, when her world would come crashing down on her even more than it already had. A misshapen green human was thrown at his feet by one of his guards. Anyway, He really needed to stop taking an observer's position on this, since he was basically free to take all their lives, and there were only 40 minutes in which he could have all the fun he wanted with them. He drew his Zanpakuto to silently, holding the gleaming cutlass in front of her before smiling in its reflection. Now, the game could officially begin. A large conglomeration of villagers were forced into the center by his soldiers, and they seemed to be at the end of their rope. They would suffice as the perfect first targets for his blade. He used Sonido to phase right in front of the group, catching the ones that could think rationally off guard. He approached the first one, an old man with purple skin, and shoved his blade into the man's torso. The man moaned in pain, and the others could only look upon him sadly, as they were powerless to stop Naruto. Kanaji had poked her head outside of the cage, seeing that Naruto had taken action against a small group of mutated villagers. What was she doing hiding while all of her comrades out there were being slaughtered? She had to do something. Before she could move on, a figure collided with her, knocking her back farther into the cage. She winced. It was a figure about her size, but she couldn't even tell that it was a human, because its form resembled something like a mud monster. But what really drew her attention away from the drooling, moaning mass was the eyes. They were a pupilless lavender. Coupled with the fact that this thing's build was similar to her, a nauseous feeling arose in her gut. Haruna-chan, she thought, almost vomiting at the sight of one of her friends twisted into this monstrosity. She hadn't even recognized the Hyuga at first, but as she took a closer look, the resemblance became more apparent to her. At this point, all feelings of survival disappeared from the girl, as she thought about what she was doing hiding away from her enemies. The sheer crime against humanity that she saw before her willed her body to move, to combat the great threat that had terrorized them all. She wanted to fight back, she just didn't know how she would be able to. Kanaji saw Naruto throw yet another villager into a spiked pit, and that, along with the fact that he was approaching her position, was what prompted her out of her hiding space. She couldn't stand it anymore, the killing that he did with such callousness. She would be a ninja one last time, and crush this monster. One of her arms was unusable from when Naruto had crushed her wrist earlier. She had lost her sandals and had gotten her feet all scuffed up, but she still trudged on out of her hiding spot, ready to fight to the death for her village. Speaking of Naruto, he had noticed her come out of the hiding spot, and he looked disturbingly eager about being ready to rough her up. Her breathing quickening as he walked slowly up to her, knowing she was near powerless. And out of nowhere, he sheathed his sword. Was he mocking her? Kanaji realized that wasn't true when she figured he was more than a match for her even barehanded. That bizarre sword that she had seen him carry before was no longer out, and now Naruto was left with his bare hands to fight her. Which, given the circumstances and how she couldn't use any chakra, it would probably be more than enough to beat her. Still, regardless of the power difference, she rushed the errand car, her good arm outstretched and prepared to let loose the strongest punch she had ever thrown in her life. It was really meant as a feint attack, but she especially surprised when Naruto just stood there and took it, smiling all the while. To put it bluntly, it felt like she punched a steel wall. She cried out in pain as her now mangled hand fell limply on its side, all of her fingers now broken from the pressure. Naruto, meanwhile, didn't have a scratch on him, his powerful hero more than able to take the feeble blow. Kanaji wasn't done yet though, and she tried to contort herself in preparation for a powerful axe kick to the face, one that would assuredly cave in a skull were she still a ninja. Naruto caught it deftly, and clutched the leg tightly. He could have crushed it to a bloody pulp at that moment, but he didn't. Instead, he used the awkward position she was in to throw her forward and allow her to land in a pathetic position in the dirt. He stared down at her violently, watching her cough up a little blood from previously obtained injuries. Beside the two of them, the sounds of a bloody massacre could be heard. You know, I thought for a second that this display had allowed you to gain some semblance of a will, but it seems I was wrong. That display of power right there was fucking pitiful, and you know it too. Maybe you need some more motivation. Naruto mused. He set his eyes on a fleeing villager, whom he plucked up and held his arms around his neck in a choking embrace. The creature coughed in alarm. Maybe if I kill another one of your precious villagers right in front of you, it will be enough to stir you into action. he shouted with glee, as Kanaji focused in on the person he had captured. It was another one of her morphed friends. It didn't take her long to figure out that the errand car was holding Nikukyu hostage, the characteristic markings of the Inuzuka clan being noticeable even on his warped frame. Kanaji supposed that Naruto would never let her have even a single shred of happiness within this place. Kanaji, the morphed Nikukyu managed to speak painfully. Naruto looked at him in slight surprise, before he let loose a mocking laugh at the boy's misfortune. Oh, would you look at that? He can still talk. I guess that means he's one of the lucky ones. Kanaji ignored his taunt, instead locking eyes with her friend. She could see just how hard it was for him to not kill himself right then and there. The pain was just too much, but Kanaji almost doubted that he actually had ability to kill himself. Run, he managed to gasp out. Kanaji felt fresh tears pour anew. But, Naruto said cryptically, squeezing tighter and tighter. He readied his free hand in preparation for a devastating punch, and he swung it towards the side of Nikukyu's head. Stop it! Shrieked Kanaji in desperation, rushing towards the errand car as fast as she could muster in her weakened state. She was too late. Naruto's fist impacted against the side of the Inuzuka's head, and it exploded in a fountain of blood. He didn't even know what had hit him. Kanahaji's fear turned to anger as she realized what had just happened, and she rushed the errand car, thoroughly prepared to rip his head off. Her motivation stopped as she became splattered with red fluid. Naruto groaned in disappointment as she ran out of steam, turning his back to her as her lost interest in the situation. He was splattered with Nikukyu's blood as well, but he didn't look the least bit perturbed by it. Of course he wouldn't. It gets a little gory, and all of a sudden you lose the motivation to kill me. Fucking pathetic, he said before he flashed away in search of a new target. Kanahaji didn't even register the words or his departure. She was too busy crying and looking at the brain that covered her body. And Nikukyu. And no, she sobbed again. Meanwhile, Naruto had noticed that his hour of playtime had been cut to a mere 20 minutes, so he decided he was going to make the best of it. He never drew his sword again, preferring to eviscerate the villagers with his bare hands. His soldiers had really outdone themselves this time. They worked with a brutality that Naruto didn't think possible from them, even if they were hollows. They killed with a captivating ruthlessness, their movements and techniques beautiful to look at as they wrought havoc upon the hapless villagers. That's probably why this display is so beautiful to me. The fact that the villagers are powerless to stop it, he said out loud, his voice slightly husky. He had to admit, the soldiers he had handpicked for this event were almost as violent and ruthless as himself, so they had no qualms about any of this. They would follow him to the death, and weren't they the reason those fools instigated their little rebellion in the underground? That was one of the reasons the rebellions failed. He had soldiers like these itching for violence. Coupled with the fact that Naruto killed mass quantities of his own hollows, even those who were slightly suspected were put to death. 17 minutes left, he supposed the preparations would begin at about the 10-minute mark. The traps would go away then, and the number of deaths would lessen until the finale. That meant he had about 7 minutes before the killing would be toned down significantly. 7 minutes, he ripped an 11-year-old in two, the former genin leaking blood from both ends. 6 minutes, 12 more villagers had fallen at his hand, and he was getting increasingly more brutal. He spotted another genin. He believed a scientist named Tribula had been responsible for creating the genin set. He would have to remind him to be more creative in the future. Still, the design of the genins seemed to be ingenious. Unfortunately, the scientist appeared to be a one-hit wonder, and produced nothing else of interest during the entire experiment. And yet, this gave a perfect opportunity that he could make use of without any traps. 5 minutes remained. 2 more minutes had passed, and Naruto stood idle as he simply watched his soldiers kill the villagers in increasingly creative ways, as well as throwing them into the traps. 2 minutes remained until the 10-minute mark, and some of the lesser-used traps were beginning to disappear into the depths of the earth. The spinning blades in particular were no longer being used. There weren't that many ways one could creatively kill someone with those, after all. The acid and lava pits were far more to his liking than a simple blade. Blades could be boring at times. Well, I'd better clear out and go find the cunt. If nothing broke her before, then this definitely will, he said, not even stopping to wonder why he had such a vendetta against Kanaji. It hit the 10-minute mark of the show, and more traps had started disappearing. A sound of mechanical whirring could be heard, and the vats of lava and acid started disappearing, a system of gears underneath the ground closing the doors over them. Kanaji was still shuddering from the blood all over here, but at least she had gotten to her feet. That was, until Naruto nonchalantly walked up to her and punched her across the face. With 2 of her teeth knocked out, the girl was knocked backwards several feet, collapsing into the dirt, and thankfully not into any one of the various traps that were still scattered along the playing field. Naruto hoisted her up by the roots of her hair, as more traps disappeared. There were now 7 minutes until the event was over, and preparations for the finale were well underway. Meanwhile, Naruto's soldiers were still disemboweling villagers, staining the dirt with their blood and internal organs. At least, the ones who had both of those things. At the 5-minute mark, there came a heavy rumbling that reverberated throughout the entire arena. Naruto, while still holding Kanaji by the hair, looked up at the balcony of the arena, where the control box was. One of the soldiers was stationed there, and he seemed to be starting. The finale was going to begin a little bit ahead of schedule. 3 minutes left. The soldiers were beginning to take the cue when the rumbling got louder and more dangerous. They dashed out of the floor of the arena, getting back to the safe bleachers in the spectators section of the arena. 2 minutes left, and the only hollow remaining on the floor was Naruto. The villagers of Konoha didn't seem to understand just what was going on. 1 minute left, and the floor began to open. Like a mechanical door opening to a top-secret facility, the floor opened slowly, and it wasn't until a few seconds in that one could see the confines of within. It was an enormous underground chamber, almost as long as the arena's diameter, while extending underground a few hundred feet. It was buffered with sturdy metal walls like that smaller chamber where the villagers had been kept before, as well as a metal floor. In a short span of an hour, nearly a third of the villagers had been brutally cut down by Naruto's army, leaving thousands of dead corpses all over the arena, while some of them had been destroyed completely. And, as the floor opened beneath them, the bodies of the dead villagers and those who were too slow to move away fell through the gaping hole in the ground. A few died on impact to the hard metal floor, but most of them just crippled themselves. The event was now officially over, and every villager, both living and alive, had been consumed by the hole in front of them. All, except for one, who was being held by Naruto himself at the very edge of the arena. He put his lips up to her ear, and then he asked her a simple question. "Do you know what a fate worse than death feels like?" He whispered softly in the ear that his mouth was almost on. And when it was all said and done, he pushed her roughly into the pit. She screamed as she felt the distance between her and the floor. She used her ninja skills to grasp on the metal wall, but without chakra all she could do was slow her descent. After a few seconds, she landed painfully amongst her fellow warped villagers, many of whom were now in even worse pain from the fall. A fate worse than death. That's what this is. When you're down here you will pray for the sweet release of death, and you will never get it. That's what makes this outcome so much more satisfying than simply destroying you. Now that I took out all my anger on you by fighting, I no longer have a need for any of you. My personal bloodlust has been satisfied, and the only thing I want now is for you, all of you, to live in constant and never-ending pain. You will live down here, you and your pathetic villagers, in constant pain, forever, he hissed loudly, making sure Kanaji could hear him. Amazingly, Kanaji managed to get her broken and mangled body to move, and she shouted in her hoarse voice up to the Aaronkar. "And what's stopping me from simply killing myself? I don't have anything to live for anymore." She smirked, thinking that Naruto had screwed up in his pain, thinking that she had won. She was disturbed when Naruto began laughing at her. "Kill yourself? You can't fool me, my darling cunt. I know you're not that selfish. Take a look around you, at the twisted abominations that you could once call villagers," Naruto said, and Kanaji seemed to catch on to what he was saying. "You could kill yourself now, but they can't. Half of them have some kind of body structure that prevents them dying with the amount of power you could produce, and the others are too focused on the sheer pain that they've completely lost their minds. They can't even think about killing themselves. You're telling me you're simply going to leave behind your villagers to suffer in agony for all eternity, when there could be a cure to be had? But Tila age. It won't be eternity, Kanaji said desperately, searching for an answer. Anything would suffice at this point. To her horror, Naruto laughed again. She turned away from him, tears in her eyes. With the fact that you are in Kampuku form, you will age much slower if not at all. Of course, that includes you as well. Let's face it, you'd rather take your chances and endure the wait for a cure rather than leave your precious villagers behind, he said. Kanaji couldn't take it anymore. She broke down crying yet again as the moans of the villagers filled her ears. They were in so much pain that she couldn't stand it. They couldn't stand it, and the worst part about it was that they would never get out. But she had to keep herself hopeful of the day they would be rescued, and the day a cure for all this madness was found. He was right, she couldn't leave the villagers she loved behind, and in a way, she already knew that she was playing right into his hand. It's a shame, really, but oh well, that's the way things turn out, I suppose, he mused, as the door began to close. When it sealed completely, her fate would be sealed as well. Kanaji looked one last time at the night sky, for it was likely the last time she would see it. As she looked upon the Hueco Mundo moon, her troubles disappeared for a split second, until they returned in full force when the shrieks and moans of the villagers overrided her senses, and Naruto's body blocked out the moon. It was getting darker, and she was still in so much pain. They were still in so much pain. And Naruto uttered one last sentence to her. She bit her lip, drawing blood. I hope you have a happy life down there with your villagers, he cackled sarcastically. Kanaji leveled one last glare at him, before the darkness got thicker and thicker, and his face disappeared beyond the metal. The door shut. Chapter 33, El Mal Desconocido. Okay, we're finally done with the senseless brutality, so all the people who didn't like it will most likely enjoy this chapter a little bit more. We're done expanding on the hollow world, now it's time to get on with the real nitty-gritty stuff. The solid metal doors shut completely, and the villagers of Konoha, as well as the girl Kanaji, had disappeared underneath the ground, never to be seen again as far as Naruto was concerned. His dream and his plan had been fulfilled, and he was totally satisfied. There was no reason to have their ugly mugs sticking around his business anymore, and from now on he could focus on bigger, better things. The soldiers in the stadium were waiting for his orders, but he didn't really care right now. They could excuse themselves if they felt like it, and didn't need his permission for every single damn thing. There was one more thing he needed to do before getting on with his life. He leisurely walked up the staircase to the control box, as the soldier who operated it exited the room. After casually obliterating the errand car, Naruto walked inside. Along the walls were several mechanisms that were used to operate the traps, and a large lever near the left side which controlled the door that opened to the underground. He smirked lightly, before he charged up a Siro in the palm of his hand. He released a beam of energy, which collided with the lever. A small explosion of light and metal, and now all that was left was a charred and broken lever, which completely cut off all the access the Konohan villagers had to the outside world. They were trapped, with no way for anyone on the outside to release the lever. Of course, now Naruto had bigger fish to fry. While he had gotten his symbolic revenge against the village that he so loathed, there was still a much bigger target than he needed to take down. The Soul Society. That was where all the original villagers and his original friends were now. He would have to destroy them. And, as much as hated to admit it, he wasn't prepared to fight them yet. He lacked the resources, the manpower, and the information to successfully wage a full-scale assault on Soul Society. The majority of the power lay within the hands of the 13 captains, and he knew nothing about their abilities other than that they were absurdly skilled in battle. He needed information on them, but there was no way to get any. The thought was frustrating, to say the least. If only there were some kind of archive about Soul Society within Hueco Mundo, but Naruto had never heard anything about that. He would have to get his hooks into the place first, and he also needed to consult the Libro de Ciclos again. Emergency! Emergency! A lone Shinigami shoved a 4th Division member out of the way as he rushed down the hallway. The symbol of Urahara Kisuke's 12th Division was underneath his robes, displayed proudly for the world to behold. There was a stack of papers nestled underneath his arms, and he stopped to panic as a few of them wormed their way out from underneath him. Taicho! He gathered them up hurriedly, before he hustled up to the sliding door that led to his captain's quarters. Knowing the captain, he was probably busy at work on some crazy little invention that would work surprisingly well in the end. The Shinigami thought back to what he saw over the monitors. That massive wave of hollows descending on that one village that got special treatment. Obviously, the Shinigami stationed there were annihilated in an instant by the wave of red. And before anyone could react, the humans had disappeared. But it wasn't like the normal hollow attack where they simply got eaten. No, this time the humans disappeared off the face of the earth, and their village was left in shambles. This was an anomaly. It had never happened before, and hollows weren't known to do anything besides eat humans. This time there was intelligent planning behind it, considering that the Shinigami were taken out first. A dirty blonde-haired man dressed in the captain's Haori of the 12th Division yawned as the door was open, before clumsily rising to his feet. He stretched his arms above his head, and the Shinigami noticed the unpleasant smell of noxious fumes wafted out of the room. What? He said simply, his lax demeanor at odds with the reputation of a captain, as well as at odds with the subordinate directly in front of him. When you've seen as much as him, you learn not to care about so-called emergencies. The unseated Shinigami held the stack of papers up in front of his captain, which would give him the full report on what had happened. Urahara stared at it while looking unimpressed. He was hoping for some sort of breakthrough on the latest invention. We need to give these to the 9th Division right away, Urahara Taishu. This is unheard of, he clamored. Urahara took the stack of papers from the Shinigami, leafing through what appeared to be the data on the destruction of Konoha. His eyes widened. Over 100,000 hollows congregated on a spot less than a spirit mile. I'm surprised the place didn't implode on itself due to their presence alone. Then again, the village of Konoha has always attracted this kind of trouble from hollows. It's been that way ever since the elemental countries were discovered, he commented. But that's not the most surprising part of this data. According to the report, readings indicate the entire village was destroyed in no time at all, and the citizens weren't subjected to the regular hollow treatment. They weren't added to the hollow's power, they just disappeared off of our radar, he said. Yes, sir, that is the most perplexing part of it. Hollows can't possibly be this coordinated, nor intelligent enough to carry out anything other than eating, the other Shinigami said. Urahara looked at him blankly. I think you're underestimating the potential of hollows. They can be crafty, and it's not unheard of for them to band together to form entire governments. But that's not the issue here. What I'm really concerned about is the way Namikaze Fukutechu and those that come from Konoha will react to this. Urahara sighed, before looking at a few photos of the ruined village. The results were devastating, even if there were no corpses to be found. This entire thing would definitely cause an outcry around Suryaidai. The hollows were getting more organized, and more bold. The former shinobi of Konoha made up a good chunk of the Shinigami force, and those who were a part of it still had tremendous pride in the village that they once called home. Particularly, those who made it to the higher seats had the most pride in it. The latest development would no doubt crush them. This could be a problem. The security we had over in Kanahigakure no Sato clearly wasn't enough to protect the village. Over 5% of all Shinigami come from that village. They have a natural tendency to have more Ryatsu, and be all-around better fighters. With the destruction of the village, the rate is going to go down, and we're still undermanned regardless. Urahara gave the report back after he had studied it. You can forget the report to the 9th Division. This goes far beyond a profiling of a hollow. I'll have to request a captain's meeting, and discuss things there. We'll have to decide what we're going to do. If organized hollows can wipe out an entire village with maximum security and a warrior populace, there's no telling what they could attack next. Yes, sir! Saluted the unseated Shinigami. Urahara sighed, as he receded back into his quarters. They would definitely have to step up their game some more if they wanted to compete with the hollows. Just going out there and slashing with a Zanpakuto wouldn't cut it anymore. They needed better tracking systems. They needed to be able to see this type of thing in action and nip it in the bud. A small explosion took place as Urahara tinkered with his latest invention again, and the captain was covered in soot. Although he had been a captain for merely 3 years, he had the respect of almost everyone in Soul Society as a genius inventor. But some of his inventions were harder to create than others. Urahara looked over to his main desk, at the top of the shelf. On the top, within a glass case, was a black orb of sorts. It was opaque, and didn't shine with any kind of ethereal energy, signifying that it was nowhere near completion. Absolutely no one knew about this yet, not even his most trusted followers, and if push came to shove, he just may have to get rid of the damn thing. It could easily become too powerful to use for any kind of good. What? Shinji winced as he relayed the information he had heard to his vice-captain, Namikaze Minato. It was times like this where Shinji could just quit and leave the 5th Division to his vice-captain, Minato Namikaze, or his third seat, Eisen Sasuke. Honestly, Minato already knew Bankai, so he was a prime contender for the spot. Sasuke had a lot of potential, and was probably Minato's equal if he didn't know Bankai. However, Shinji thought the third seat was going to learn it any day now. That partially worried him. Honestly, he would have reacted the same way if he were told that his hometown had been destroyed. Hell, Konoha wasn't even his hometown, and even he reacted in disbelief over it. Though, that was more due to the circumstances at play than any sort of attachment to the village that his vice-captain once called home. Hirako Taishu, please. Say that again. I want to make sure I heard you correctly, Minato said, his voice eerily calm. Anyone could tell the tension that was behind it, though. The 5th Division captain sighed, denial. I'm sorry, Minato, but that's the way the captain's meeting went. According to the 12th Division, there is no doubt that the village of Konohagakure no Sato has been destroyed by an unknown hollow attack force. Even with the personal guard at that location, there was no way that they could have survived against a wave of over 100,000 hollow. It's better that you don't see the report. Shinji added that last part as a mere whisper. Minato stared, his mouth opening and closing like some kind of fish. He tried to talk to his captain, but there was no sound coming out, and his mind was in complete shock. He was too dazed to do anything but stare. The wreckage was devastating, but Kasuke said that this wasn't a normal hollow attack. Rather than eating them, they simply disappeared from the face of the earth. I'll tell you my theory on it. They were swept up into Hueco Mundo. After Minato heard that, he found his voice. So they're still alive? That means that we could Shinji cut him off on the spot. Hold your horses there, Minato. Yes, they might be still alive, but we have no idea how to get to Hueco Mundo, and we don't know whether they're there in the first place. It's worrisome if that were the case, because that means that the Hollows figured out some way to get humans to Hueco Mundo. Minato stared at his captain, his frown deepening. Look, I hate to tell you this, Minato, but you've got to let it go. Go tell your comrades from the village about this, and mourn together with them. That's all you can do at this point in time. I'm sorry. Minato nodded stoutly. He couldn't stop a few tears from flowing down his face. Without even bothering to address his captain, the vice-captain of the 5th Division walked out of Shinji's quarters. A few Shinigami stopped to greet him, but they were met with a cold stare. Shinji sighed again. Minato better get over this quickly. I don't want him becoming obsessed over this. Shinji looked down. There was a copy of the report sitting on his desk. He leafed through it, coming to a halt on one of the pictures. It was a semi-close-up of a humanoid figure of about 5.5 feet tall, grinning madly as it was about to decapitate the poor soul that was taking the picture. The figure was wearing a hooded brown robe, so most of its face was obscured, save for the lunatic grin it was wearing. The only other striking feature about the figure were 2 hollow mask-like protrusions sticking out of holes in the top of its hood. Shinji had heard of beings like this before. He believed they were called Arankar, though he had never seen one in person. They didn't really take action in the human world. Supposedly, Arankar were hollows that had removed their masks and gained the power of a Shinigami. If that were the case, and an errand car was leading this crusade, then no wonder the hollows were able to become so organized. He studied the picture again, noting the clearer features from the last time he saw a picture from Konoha. The last time I was in Konoha. That was back when I was a vice captain. I was called to defend the borders of Konoha against an attacking Ajuchas. A fox, if I remember. The damn thing was obsessed with destroying that village. I remember that now. That grinning fox Ajuchas was the only hollow I ever lost to in my entire Shinigami car. Wait, grinning fox hollow? He turned back to the picture at hand, studying it closely, his heart beating in anticipation. He knew that grin from anywhere. It was burned into his brain after he had been defeated. Those two protrusions on the top of the figure's head, they looked familiar. Shinji stood up from his desk chair, calling two of his newer recruits into his quarters. Yes, Hirako Taishu? They questioned. Shinji pointed to the one on the left. Go to the 12th Division right away. Tell them Hirako Taishu sent you and request the residual Ryatsu samples from the recent attack on Konoha no Sato, and the ones from the attack 160 years ago. It should still be in the archives of things from before its founding. Tell them to run a few tests on them, and see if we can find some kind of match, he ordered. The Shinigami on the left saluted and ran out of the building. The Shinigami on the right waited for his orders. You have a much simpler duty. Go to the 9th Division and tell them that we may need to update one of the hollows in Suriidi's Most Wanted, he ordered. The other Shinigami mimicked his comrade, and then took off. Shinji sat back down and calmed his breathing. They might need to hold another captain's meeting. Suriidi was beginning to change for the worse. They wouldn't be able to keep up with the hollows at this rate. And they had been doing so well before. Minato was glad that he had left Taiki and Akane at home today. The young, impressionable Shinigami wouldn't like to hear this. Physically, they were now 14 years old, and seemed to be in that teenage phase. Still, they were getting along in life well. Maybe they would surpass him and Kushina soon. He had invited everyone else that he knew to the conference, though. Even Kushina didn't know what was going on yet, and it would break his heart to tell her. Other than that, some of Naruto's friends had joined the Shinigami forces, and they were eager to learn whether or not their friend was safe. All in all, the meeting consisted of many people, including himself, Kushina, Jiraiya, Tsunade, Kakashi, Asuma, Rin, Shikamaru, Niji, Hinata, Kiba, and Ino. Minato was glad that he scooped up some of Naruto's friends after they died in the war, because they were getting quite proficient in their own right. Those 5 had become seated officers in their division. Kushina and himself were both vice captains. There were a few others within the association that he didn't know personally, but they weren't seated officers. Their character is lacking, so there's no way they would ever be important. Minato thought, but he would never say it out loud. Anyway, their eyes were all on him, staring at the vice captain blankly. He was the one who had called this meeting to order, so it made sense that he would be the one talking. And boy, did he have news. He might as well not sugarcoat it. Everyone, he began, as the listeners tuned in. Konoha has been destroyed, he said simply. Silence. Dead fucking silence. Not a single voice was heard from that room as Minato delivered the words to them that would be most devastating to all of them. Their beloved village, the place where the will of fire burned strong, was now gone. Some people had their mouths opened, while others still simply stared wide-eyed. Whatever the case, there wasn't a single emotion that was calm in that room. Even Hyuga Niji was visibly stunned. After nearly a minute of stunned silence, someone finally gathered their wits enough to speak. How? Asked Hyuga Hinata, of all people. Minato had always had a soft spot for the girl, ever since she had arrived at the Shinigami Academy. Especially after he learned that this was the girl who was after his first son's heart. She was almost as torn up at his absence as Minato was. Minato's eyes were downcast, and the former Hokage refused to meet glances with anyone, afraid to see depressed and stunned glances. Hollows, but that isn't the most surprising facet of the whole ordeal. It was a wave of over 100,000 hollows. They didn't stand a chance. But it was coordinated with the kind of coordination a group of hollows can hope to have. So, you're saying this was someone's plan? Shouted Inuzuka Kiba. Minato stared at him. There were tears in his eyes, and he was reacting in the best way he possibly could, with anger. Most likely, yes. And that's not where the report ends. I don't know much about the details of what happened, but it seems that there were no traits of a normal hollow attack. Instead, it was like the villagers of Konoha just disappeared, never to be seen again. So, that means they could still be alive out there, right? Shikamaru added his 2 cents into the conversation. Usually, he only attended these meetings out of obligation, but now he was paying rapt attention to the proceedings on display. I wouldn't get your hopes up on that, Shikamaru. From all accounts, this was a hollow attack, and hollows have never known to be merciful. Even if they're still alive, they're probably suffering some horrible fate, wherever they are, Jiraiya said stoutly. That seemed to be his way of dealing with it. He was purposely trying to keep any emotion out of his voice. Needless to say, it wasn't working, and he still sounded visibly upset. No one seemed to blame him about it. Well, are we just gonna sit back and let this happen? We need to bring whatever sick fuck did this to justice. Kiba shouted passionately. He sounded unrefined, but his sentiments were shared by most of the group. Trust me, Kiba. That is exactly what we plan on doing. We can't let whoever was behind this to get away with it, and we certainly can't let it do this to another village. We will find whoever did this, Minato said, determination flowing through his voice. The others rose from their seats as well. They glared determinedly at Minato. If I know my captain, he's already begun work on who the mastermind behind this, if there is one at all. It shouldn't be long before we figure the true circumstances behind the attack, Minato explained. I would like you all to wait patiently until that time comes. Don't try anything reckless, and don't show any emotional turmoil while you're on the job. I know this is a hard time, but we must mourn in silence, Minato said, his voice tinged with more sadness. These words seemed to drain the fire from everyone's spirit, and they slumped back in their seats, the realization that their village was gone coming back. But when we get our evidence, we will show the hollows that did this our will of fire. We will bring them to justice for what they did to our beloved village. Even if Konoha is now in shambles, we will show them our spirit, the love that comes for everyone in the village. He shouted, the charisma of a former Hokage being embedded in his words. He turned away from them, and his voice became much quieter as the more depressing aspect of this sank in. At this point, we can only pray that our villagers are safe. He paused, before turning back to them. Wherever they are, I just hope that they aren't dead. I really appreciate you helping me get to the bottom of this, Kisuke, Shinji commented as he and Urahara walked through the halls of the 1st Division barracks. They were both on their way to another captain's meeting regarding the fate of Konoha. Urahara was carrying 2 glass containers of what appeared to be concentrated Ryatsu. Shinji looked like Hiyori had gotten to him again. No problem. This mystery over what happened to Konoha is something that will affect the input of new Shinigami, and we need to be prepared for this errand car, should he ever come onto the scene again. Have you sent word to the 9th Division? Urahara asked. Yeah, they're waiting for some solid evidence before they update their archive. We found the hollow we were looking for, though. A small-sized foxajuch going by the codename Vulpes C. Urahara nodded. Yeah, and according to the Ryatsu samples we got from the archive and the ones from the Siriidi's Most Wanted, he was there during both invasions. Except, he seems to be much more powerful this time. The first sample indicates he was a simple high-level foxajuch 160 years ago, something any captain here could take out. But now he seems to be a Vasta Lord-class Arankar Hollow. But this doesn't prove anything. It just means that Vulpes C is a very strong suspect in being the mastermind behind the destruction of Konoha. According to the archives, he's been inactive in the human world since the attack on Konoha 160 years ago. The only reason his record hasn't been scrapped is because he was the main reason that hollows now go to the elemental countries. I don't understand why he would become active again now, Shinji replied. Maybe he was just biding his time. But it doesn't matter. If we get the proof on this hollow, we should be able to follow his Ryatsu signature after we've familiarized ourselves with these. Urahara motioned to the glass containers, containing the concentrated essence of a hollow's Ryatsu. I'll say. It's a very pungent Ryatsu, and one I don't think I'll be able to forget. But on to another concern. Come out, Sasuke! Shinji called backwards down the hall, where it angled directly to the right. Anyone hiding there would be out of view. Neither Urahara nor Shinji looked surprised as a bespectacled Shinigami rounded the corner from behind them. A soft smile played on his lips as he observed the two captains discuss. Hirako Taishu, he said distantly. You shouldn't eavesdrop on folks so much, Sasuke. How much of our conversion did you hear? Hirako asked. Urahara panned his head between the captain and the third seat. Eisen's expression didn't change. Forgive me, Hirako Taishu. I was curious about the state affairs in Konoha, considering Minato Fukutechu has been so distant lately. I couldn't help but overhear everything that you said. I apologize, Eisen remarked. Shinji ran a hand through his hair and sighed exasperatedly. Whatever. Just don't let it happen again. I'm already in enough heat for blabbing what could be top secret information, but this news is gonna come out sooner or later, so I'll let it slide. Eisen smiled and bowed at his captain, before he dismissed himself down the hallway. Once he was out of sight, he clutched the hilt of his Zanpakuto, which was hanging at his side. This would be too easy. The captain's meeting was set up like a standard one, 6 captains on each side, with the Sotaishu in the center in his chair. The far wall had space reserved for a projector image. Yamamoto looked up expectantly as the 2 captains entered the room, their supplies hindering their weight slightly. This was their meeting, after all. The other 11 captains were already there. They looked at the other 2 blankly, as if they didn't care what Urahara and Shinji had to say. Shinji took his place in the line of captains, while Urahara began to set up the projector. After 5 minutes of tinkering with it, a light shone out of the narrow end of the camera, projecting the picture of the figure seen in the report. A few captains stared at the picture, while a few more glared at it. Either way, no one knew what to make about the figure. It clearly wasn't your standard hollow by any stretch, given the humanoid figure. Regarding the incident in Konoha 2 weeks ago to this day, we believe that we have found a prime suspect in who was leading all those hollows, as well as who orchestrated the attack, Urahara began. Yamamoto stared at him intently, but didn't stop his speech. Furthermore, I have analyzed the Ryatsu at this attack, as compared to the attack on Konoha 160 years ago by the hollow known as Vulpes C. On both incidents, the Ryatsu of Vulpes C has been noted to have existed in some way or form. In addition to that, he is now classified as a Vastolord class Arankar, rather than the Ajucha's hollow from the first attack, making him a prime leader of hollows. We believe that the picture taken here is of Vulpes C, if not another Arankar directly under his control. The captains remained silent. We lack definitive proof at this point in time, but if we can browse through the archives on this particular hollow, we may be able to crack this case and strike the source of the invasion before another one can occur. Would that be acceptable, Mugirumo Taishu? He turned to address the 9th Division captain. Kensei looked thoughtful for a moment. He turned to Yamamoto, who nodded at him. I guess that would be alright, if we can get one step closer to solving this. Just don't make any modifications to his profile without any definitive proof, he said apathetically. Of course not. As a scientist I know better than to do that. Yamamoto banged his staff against the hardwood of the floor, bringing the group's attention back onto him. Very well. I will leave the investigation to the 12th Division Captain Urahara Kisuke. The wanton destruction of Konohagakure no Sato is trampling all over the world's justice, and is an S-class security threat to the human world. The hypothetical mastermind behind this needs to be classified as a top-secret threat. Even if this is just a random attack of hollows, this is a precarious situation. Without the input of future Shinigami from that village, I hereby order all divisions to increase the intensity of their training. The Godii 13 must not fall behind with the advancements of the hollow race. He paused a little while to let the information sink in, before he banged his staff again. You are all dismissed. 2 nights later, an unidentified figure snuck into the research facility, where the Ryatsu samples of Vulpes C were being held. He was admittedly a little excited about the entire thing. That little bit of information he had heard would provide him with a perfect weapon for his army. If it was a Vastolord class Arankar, and led a massive army of hollows, then this hollow was powerful, and likely had more powerful hollow and Arrancar within his ranks. The weak ones would be perfect for his experiments. With his shark eye, sneaking into the 12th Division's research facility was as simple as could be. Even with all the traps and security measures the place had, it would be so easy to conjure up some hypnosis so no one ever expected anything. He had already gotten through about half of the hindrances. A brown-haired man in the Shinigami uniform of the 5th Division adjusted his glasses before he walked into the main lab where the samples were on display. The 12th Division really was quite useful to him. He got all his other equipment from them, and they never even realized that it went missing. Honestly, he almost hoped he had gotten drafted into the 12th Division, rather than the 5th. There was the display case now. There were 2 of them, but he would only need the one on the right. It would give him the means to track the Arrancar down, and since he was making a breakthrough on the Garganta, it would be soon that he would be able to set off. Shatter Kyuka Sujetsu, he whispered, setting an illusion over the glass so that he could muffle the noise. He broke the glass completely, and grabbed the second Ryatsu sample, before he placed an illusion to make it look like it was never missing. Honestly, some Shinigami would be fooled by anything, even a simple illusion. That would keep them busy, but of course they would never be able to find their true objective. The man smiled softly. He really needed to back and put this in storage. He had to rendezvous with a young boy fresh out of the academy. Maybe he could pit him against their 4th seat. He set out of the laboratory setting. He hoped he could find that Arrancar and make him useful to his cause. Chapter 34. La Caída de Reino Animal. It had been several years since Naruto had imprisoned the warped villagers of Konoha within the bowels of his arena. During that time period, the Reino animal continued to grow in size and power, swallowing up smaller hollow kingdoms and being more than a match for Las Noches. The 2 kingdoms entered a cold war of sorts, both being afraid of mutual destruction if they were to come to blows. Berrigan had wanted a slightly weaker opponent he could face in war, not one that matched him on every scale. Naruto had clearly gotten out of hand fast, but Berrigan had never found the perfect opportunity to strike. The humanoid king had actually gathered more of an army and took more territory when he had learned that Naruto was rapidly becoming a serious threat. So began the Hollow Arms race, with each side trying to outdo the other. The only difference between the 2 was that Naruto had virtually no interest in Berrigan. He had forgotten all about the grudge he had against him years ago. He was gathering power for the sake of challenging Soul Society. He couldn't afford to waste hollows and resources on a smaller fish. Absolutely everything in the kingdom came down to declaring war on the Soul Society. They were rapidly building both the resources, inventions, and military necessary to challenge them. The Libro de Ciclos was very clear on how they needed to go about it. There was just one thing that Naruto was lacking above all else. That thing was information. Soul Society's power almost entirely lay within its 13 captains, and overpowering them and destroying them was an imperative. Such a thing wouldn't be easy though, and Naruto lacked information on their Zanpakutus and even abilities in general. The way they lead, how they could be taken advantage of, there was a lack of information in the archives. Naruto sat alone in his throne room, mulling over what he should do about the Soul Society. Hollows that knew the inner workings of Soul Society were hard to come by. That was probably why it had never been invaded by a full-fledged hollow force before. He messed with his brown robe a little bit, figuring that he would be at a standstill if he couldn't solve this conundrum. He needed someone who did know this information, one who could tell him everything he knew, or better yet, one who had all this information recorded somewhere. He had hid El Libro de Ciclos away in his back chamber, after one of his guards accidentally peeked in it and beheld its great secrets. He had ruthlessly slaughtered the guard after that, but the idea of the book becoming known throughout the world was unacceptable. Assassination attempts would double, even with the rebellion effectively under control. Naruto was staring out the window when the door suddenly creaked open, and a panicked guard rushed into the throne room screaming his head off. Naruto-sama! Naruto-sama! Naruto refrained from killing him right there. He may have important information to report. What is it? Stop screaming your head off and tell me! Naruto barked forcefully. The guard blanched a little but was otherwise too panicked to pay attention. El Las Noches was crushed, my emperor, he said lightly, waiting for the explosion that was sure to accompany this. Surprisingly, it never came, which was odd considering the emotional and short-tempered king that sat before him. What? Las Noches crushed? Who the hell could beat them? Asked Naruto, more casually than one would think. That's just it, Naruto-sama. The ones that defeated Baragon's kingdom are here, sir. They say they want to talk to you. Naruto rubbed his chin, thinking he had seen a few shadows through the crack in the door. With a quick zero, he obliterated the guard that had gave him this information, as the door to the throne room swung open in full. The sound of 3 separate footfalls was heard in the room, as what entered there were not hollows. Naruto still looked bored, noticing the very human shapes that also lacked any kind of mask or hole on their bodies. So they weren't Arrancar. Shinigami, huh? Shinigami were the ones that took out that old fuck. I don't suppose I need to be told why you're here then, Naruto said. All 3 of them seemed to wear a haori that Naruto knew belonged to captains in Soul Society. The one that really caught his attention was the one in the center though. It was a brown-haired man with glasses. He had a soft smile plastered on his face that Naruto could tell wasn't genuine right there. He looked sort of dopey to Naruto, but there was something about him that just placed him on edge. He felt himself reflexively reaching for his Zanpakuto. I assume you are the king of Reino Animal. I have heard that an Arrancar was the one leading, the man in the center spoke. Even his voice sounded fruity to Naruto. That would be me, yes. You assume correctly, gay boy, Naruto taunted, but the man made no indication that he was even slightly flustered by Naruto's insult. Surprisingly, the dark-skinned Shinigami on his right seemed to be the one that was annoyed. Let's talk about something, king of the Reino Animal. Naruto raised an eyebrow, but decided to humor both them and himself for the time being. My name is Eisen Sasuke, and I am here to ask you one question. Are you satisfied with what you have? Do you ever feel this place is not where you should be? Don't you want to rise even higher? Naruto didn't like where this was going. I will aid you, and if you follow me. There was the kicker. Naruto rose from his throne, and blasted a single zero at the 3 Shinigami that had the audacity to offer him terms. They dodged it swiftly, each of them touching down at different points in the room. Eisen still looked calm. The silver-haired one had a stupid grin on his face, but the black one was furious. What a fucking crock! Naruto bellowed, as the scattered Shinigami stared at the furious king. Me follow you. A hollow following a Shinigami will never happen. We're mortal enemies, designed for killing one another. Naruto walked down across the hall towards them, but he didn't draw his Zanpakuto. The 3 Shinigami had already drawn theirs. It is true that I desire something more than the simple little kingdom within Hueco Mundo. I'm not God after all, but I plan on destroying every last one of you miserable Shinigami. A hollow like me following you when I'm trying to destroy you would be a disgrace. I will not become your lackey, unlike these 2 pieces of trash that you somehow managed to round up. The black one was clutching his sword tightly, teeth gritting in rage. Naruto turned his attention to him first. Did I upset you, you kiss-ass lackey? But you probably can't do anything without your butt buddy's permission, can you? He mocked, before bursting into peals of laughter. Eisen-sama, give me permission to execute this Arrancar. Such a destructive soul could never serve justice in our army. The black man shouted. Can aim, Eisen said stoically. Tosen still looked pissed off at Naruto, and held his sword out in front in preparation to attack. Naruto grinned psychotically. He drew his Zanpakuto, before ultimately deciding against using it and setting it back in its sheath. Shuinpa and Sonito collided as both combatants rushed each other, and Sonito ultimately won out as without even blinking, Naruto was suspending Tosen 5 feet in the air by his neck. Tosen's Zanpakuto clanged against the floor as he placed his heads on the Arrancar's arm. Being a captain, he obviously wasn't used to being overpowered so easily, as the look of surprise in his face would give away. Naruto crushed the Shinigami's shoulder with his other hand and continued choking him. He started coughing violently, grunting as his bones broke. Do you have any idea who you're picking a fight with? Naruto said lowly, thoroughly intending to end the Shinigami's life. Tosen looked over to Eisen, hoping that he would be the savior that he dreamt of. Wait, Eisen said, the smile on his face indicating that he in no way cared about his subordinate. If anything, he was thrilled that there was a hollow that could defeat Tosen in a fight. He held out his Zanpakuto in front of Naruto. Why don't you take a look at my sword first, he said, as Naruto released Tosen to focus his attention on the new enemy. Its name is Kyuka Sujetsu. Naruto breathed out deeply. Shatter Kyuka Sujetsu. Eisen dropped his sword, but there was no change in the surrounding area. No power-ups or anything like that. He just dropped his Zanpakuto, and there was no effect. Tosen was clearly incapacitated for the time being, so Naruto was prepared to move on to the next target. The grinning man seemed to be watching this passively, so he would move on to Eisen. He drew his Zanpakuto now, ready to cleave the brown-haired Shinigami in two. To see that arrogant smile wiped off of his face. He gave Eisen a horizontal slash across his torso. That was usually all he needed to finish a fight with his Zanpakuto. What he got was Eisen disappearing into a misty substance. What the? Genjutsu? He thought as Eisen disappeared into the hazy substance. He jolted himself out of his thoughts. He hadn't seen Genjutsu in about 200 years, and there was no way anyone in the afterlife had the ability to use it. But the effect was so similar that he had been mistaken at first. Out of reflex, he pointed his hands upwards in the Genjutsu release hand seal, and tried to exert some reiatsu that would break the illusion. Nothing happened. Naruto grit his teeth and tried again. It was the same result as before. Already, his mind was running diagnostics as to what he would do. The Shinigami wanted Naruto to serve him, and if he were to be defeated and forced to serve, he would have to spend all his time working to defeat this Shinigami. My Shirkai has the power of absolute hypnosis. I can turn a fly into a dragon, and a grassy field into a deadly swamp if I so wish to. I'm afraid there is nothing you can do to break the hypnosis. Once you are under its influence, you are permanently affected. Explaining your power to the enemy. Either he's a fucking amateur, or he's very confident in his abilities. I'm going to wager a guess and say it's the latter, Naruto thought. It was times like this that Naruto wished he could have kept a few ninja skills from his time in life. It would have made the battle a little easier, despite the fact that he was much stronger now. Eisen appeared again next to his throne, and Naruto used Sonito to get right next to him in a blink of an eye. He slashed him strongly, in an attack that would be guaranteed to kill him, also slicing through his throne and half of the main palace while he was at it. A fountain of blood emerged from the diagonal slash, as Eisen was sliced in half straight through the chest. Naruto sighed in relief. Seeing the blood come out made him positive that he had gotten Eisen that time. It gave him solace. His eyes widened as a figure materialized directly behind, and Naruto was promptly stabbed. Chapter 35, La Primera Espada. Naruto fell onto his throne, clutching the stab wound he had received from Aizen's Zanpakuto. Meanwhile, the bastard continued to stand there with that smug smile plastered all over his face, his bloody sword clutched at his side. There was no one around that Naruto could call. He had no guards outside. It was up to him to end this fight. The black bastard was still glaring at him, and he looked eager to finish him off while in his wounded state. His sword has so much power to it, but that's not even the main concern. Apparently this guy has control over unbreakable illusions. It's in a whole other league than Genjutsu. Genjutsu at least was breakable, and required some kind of trigger to activate it. This Shinigami can just create illusions at will, he thought. I can see that you have already become an Arankar. That makes things far easier, Eisen commented, stepping forward towards the downed emperor. Naruto clutched the sleeves of his brown robe in his hands, dragging himself to his feet in order to resume the battle. He held his cutlass Zanpakuto out, while Eisen did the same thing. This final attack would finish things, for better or for worse. The two combatants rushed each other, one with a calm smile on his face and the other with an enraged scowl. Naruto was the faster of the two, but he cleaved through nothing but air, while Eisen managed to get a heavy slash through Naruto's midsection. The Shinigami captain's blows were so strong, Naruto had never felt anything like it. Blood gushed from the wound, and Naruto collapsed onto his knees. Eisen sheathed his sword, clearly satisfied with the easy victory, all because of his Kyuka-Suigetsu's powers. What are you going to do with him, Eisen-san? Asked Ikemaru, away in the corner. Tosen looked at the downed king, before he scoffed, clutching the area where Naruto had choked him. Naruto had not yet lost consciousness. Rather, his brain was already thinking of ways how he could defeat that Zanpakuto's abilities. The fundamentals of his shuriken seemed very similar to how Genjutsu worked, but I see that the Ryatsu samples did not disappoint. We have now captured a very strong Arrancar. He will be a perfect addition into the Espada, most likely at a very high number, Eisen stated, as he looked over the wounded Arrancar. But he was still no match for your Kyuka-Suigetsu, Jin commented. The three Shinigami loomed over the fallen Arrancar, who grit his teeth and scowled. Now, Emperor Naruto of the Reino Animal, you have two choices in this matter. You may serve me, and elevate to a plane of existence you didn't even believe possible. Or you can die thoughtless and ignorant. The choice is yours alone, Eisen said. Naruto bowed, if only so Eisen wouldn't see the look of extreme hatred plastered all over it. Naruto stood in front of a large mirror in the Palace of Las Noches, as he slinged on his new Arrancar uniform. Fashionably, it was far more practical than the ragged brown robe he had worn for hundreds of years. He had already put on the white jacket, and he tied his sash around his waist after putting on his hakama pants. The Arrancar inspected himself in the mirror. It was the same standard uniform as all the other Arrancar in Aizen's army, though his did have a slightly higher collar than usual. After he was done dressing himself, Naruto punched forward, shattering the mirror into tiny pieces. He hated having to do this, serve under that crackpot Shinigami. But he had been patient before, and he could do it again. He was going to work in secret on breaking his shurikai's damnable illusions, and when the time was right he would overthrow his command in Las Noches and take control for himself. It helped that Eisen didn't know about the Libro de Ciclos. Naruto? Came a cold, emotionless voice from outside the changing rooms. Naruto hummed to himself, his eyes half shut. One of them moved over to see a silhouette in the doorway. Ulquiorra? The soft pitter-patter of shoes was heard as Ulquiorra entered the room and leaned against the far wall, slightly obscured by the shadows. Aizen-sama wants you to meet him in the throne room so he can decide your future in the Arrancar army. He is still figuring out where to draft the members of the Reino Animal. Some have already been inducted into the Numeros. Despite this, he wants all the exceptional killers there at once so we may figure out where we'll be placed within the Espada, Ulquiorra explained. Naruto nodded in understanding. With the recent takeover of both Las Noches and the Reino Animal by Eisen, Naruto would have expected a large power vacuum to take place all over the Hollow Plain with the absence of Hueco Mundo's two most powerful kings. Despite this, Eisen had proven his power when he established dominion over both of those kingdoms, quashing any resistance as well as any motives of lesser kingdoms vying for the dominant power of Hueco Mundo. Conquering both of those kingdoms also meant a large input of powerful Arrancar that were now under Aizen's allegiance. That meant that many of the old Arrancar that had served him before Eisen had toppled Las Noches would now be outclassed. There would be an extreme restructuring of the ranks, and Naruto could tell already that the old Espada and Numeros would not be happy about that. Not that they could really do anything about it, though. He and Ulquiorra were among the candidates that were being considered for entry into the Espada, the highest rank in the army that consisted of 10 Arrancar far more powerful than average. In Soul Society, parallels could be drawn with the captains. Despite his loathing of Eisen and his forced service, he was very eager to find out what powerful Arrancar he had underneath his command that he could slaughter. As he finished dressing himself, he walked outside the door towards the hall, where he and his right-hand man would proceed towards the Espada orientation. Ulquiorra was silent during the entire walk. His eyes kept panning downwards, and he looked like he wanted to say something to Naruto, but couldn't. Naruto brushed off the feeling as soon as they had reached the double doors into the throne room. It was a little more ornate than Naruto remembered from his time with Baragon, though Eisen was in the middle of renovating the palace and making it more suitable for Shinigami, rather than hollows like themselves. He opened the door casually, squinting slightly as light flooded the room. A smooth voice rang out through the din. "Welcome, Naruto. Ulquiorra. So nice of you to join us," it said softly, as Naruto was greeting with the bespectacled face of Eisen Sasuke. How he hated that face. The two Arrancars stepped into the room, and Naruto looked around while Ulquiorra went to mingle. There were about 20 prospective Espada in total, meaning that Eisen was really upping the ante for entry. Besides Ulquiorra, there were familiar faces like Haribel, Neutra, Grimjow, and Sale. His rival King Barrigan was sitting alone in the corner by his lonesome, clearly not interested in talking to him. Naruto guessed that Barrigan was feeling the same way about the loss of his kingdom, but it seemed that his subordinates at least still respected him. His former subordinates seemed to be giving him the cold shoulder, except for Sale surprisingly, who smiled at him. It was to be expected. After he had lost, all of the hollows in his kingdom had immediately shifted allegiances. Up the ornate staircase, there were 10 chairs placed in a row directly below Eisen's throne, each of them containing an Arrancar that was looking down at them smugly. Their expressions were mixed, to be honest. A few looked genuinely excited to rip apart some fools that dared challenge an Espada, while others glared down at the prospective fighters. The rest just looked on stoically. Whatever the case, though, they all looked overconfident. The rows seemed to be order left to right from strongest to weakest. There was a skinny, snake-eyed Arrancar with a tattooed 8 on who was glaring at the Arrancar, with a blue-haired woman with the number 62 seats to the left, who was smirking cockily down at them. She locked eyes with Naruto and grinned wider, like she was looking down on him. He sneered at her. Was she dense or something? Surely she should have been intimidated by the former king of the Reino animal. A brief murmuring was heard throughout the room, before Eisen rose from his seat and addressed all of them. "Welcome, my dear future subordinates. I have gathered each and every one of you here today because I feel that you have the will, power, and leadership necessary to take one of the honored positions as Espada in my forces," he began. As you know, the Espada are the top 10 Arrancar in Las Noches. They are given a number from 1 to 10 based on the level of their strength. They also have the authority to command any Arrancar with a rank of 11 or higher. You should all be proud that you have been nominated for such a position, he said. Some of the Arrancar cheered, but Naruto just scowled. However, you will find that becoming an Espada is not such an easy task. The Arrancar that you see before you are in fact the current members of my beloved Espada. Each and every one of them is a combat expert, and they all command unique and terrifying abilities that make them worthy of their rank. If you are to become an Espada in my forces, you will have to challenge an Espada individually, and best him or her in battle to claim their title. Do try not to kill each other though. I would hate for some brilliant fighters to be wasted here, he said in a tone of voice that indicated that he didn't care at all. Naruto scoffed. At least he didn't sugarcoat anything, unlike Eisen. I'm feeling generous today, so I'll let you battle the Espada of your choice. Now let's see, if there is anyone who wishes to challenge an Espada for their rank, please let me know now. Might as well get this over with now, Naruto thought, as he panned his eyes throughout the selection of Espada he could challenge. His eyes landed on a bizarre Arrancar, whose head seemed to be a jar with some red liquid contained within. He or it wore a frilly Arrancar robe, but what caught Naruto's eyes were the 2 floating masked heads contained within the liquid. Naruto smirked, before it turned into a full, psychotic grin after he caught the sight of the tattooed one that was on both of the heads. The Primera Espada, eh? He will do, he said, locking eyes with the strange Arrancar. The Arrancar stared back. I guess I'll go first, Eisen, he said unenthusiastically, when no one else spoke up. Eisen smiled as he stared at the former king, clearly happy with this development. Naruto, I am very happy for your enthusiasm in joining the Espada. Who do you wish to challenge? Eisen asked. Naruto lifted a hand slightly, pointing it towards the chair at the far left of the row. Him, he said simply, pointing at the Primera, and top dog among the Espada. This action only made Eisen smile even wider, like he knew Naruto was going to pick that option. The Jared Arenkar simply sat there with his hands folded in his lap, not even acknowledging the fact that he had been chosen. In a way, he was probably expecting it. There were plenty of overconfident Arenkar that felt they had a shot at the top position. Silence. Dead silence. The Arenkar that were vying for a position stared at him blankly. Many of them had been in his kingdom, and more than knew what he was capable of. The Espada looked at each other for a brief moment, before they burst out into laughter at the seemingly foolish challenge. They muttered things like, "Is he stupid? Is he actually thinking of challenging Eren?" The blue-haired female even rose from her seat, and pointed at Naruto. "Trash, we know you're stupid and all, but even challenging Eren goes far beyond the realm of stupidity. Your arrogance here is unbelievable, young Hollow. When he is done you will be nothing more than a stain on the marble floor, which in of itself is an insult to Eisen-sama," she shouted, looking down on Naruto. Naruto grit his teeth, and his eyes became bloodshot. A few Arenkar could have sworn that they heard a snap. "Yep, this cunt is definitely delusional," he thought, suppressing the urge to just slaughter her where she stood. Such a thing would only get him in deeper shit with Eisen, though. Eren ignored the jeers that his fellow Espada were slinging Naruto's way, and simply rose from his seat. He made his way down the stairs, and all of the Arenkar around him gave him a wide berth. There were a few more snorting chuckles from the box above, where the remainder of the Espada were seated. Above them, Eisen looked upon the two of them passively. He raised his right hand, signifying that they could begin whenever they were ready. The center of the room had been cleared of all obstructions, so the two Arenkar could fight uninterrupted. Naruto got into position about 15 feet opposite Eren, staring the Primera down. Naruto raised an eyebrow as he witnessed the two heads speak in tandem. "With the power that Eisen-sama has vested in us," the top one said in a deep voice, "and our Glotoniria ability, nothing can stand up to us," the bottom head said in a much more high-pitched tone. "Give up now," they said simultaneously. The two-headed Arenkar pulled off one of his gloves, unveiling the squishy red tentacle that served as his Zanpakuto. That was supposed to be Glotoniria, but how it was supposed to help him fight, Naruto didn't know. "Do you ever shut the fuck up? Just hurry up and come at me so I can enjoy slicing that glass head of yours into pieces," Naruto shouted, as he drew his sword. More chuckling from the other Espada. "Such a fool," the two heads said, as Eren readied his tentacle Zanpakuto. He was the one who made the first move, using Sonito to get the jump on his opponent. Naruto did the same thing. The two clashed in the exact center of the room, Eren tentacle trying to match Naruto's cutlass Zanpakuto. The Zanpakutos ground against each other, and they sped to the opposite ends of the room, backs facing one another. Naruto sheathed his Zanpakuto. The Espada and the Arenkar's eyes widened as both heads of Eren shrieked in pain. The Primera Espada collapsed onto his knees, and the sound of breaking glass could be heard. A few seconds later, the jar containing Eren heads was sliced in half diagonally once, and then once more. The red liquid poured from the broken container, and the two heads were both cleaved through the middle. The bottom one shrieked the loudest, moaning about how he thought Eisen was going to save him. The top head merely cursed Naruto, not willing to accept his defeat. A few seconds later, and both of them were dead. The 9 lower-ranked Espada watched in shock and awe as the strongest Espada in their ranks was taken out in a single hit, with barely any effort from the opposite party. The former generals in Naruto's army sighed. Eren really was no match for Naruto. The Espada had looked like he was a Jillian, after all. Superb skills on display once again. "Naruto," Eisen commented, the smile on his face widening quite substantially. He didn't even seem to care that Naruto had killed his finest Espada. Naruto scoffed at him. "Yeah, whatever. I take it I'm the Primera Espada now or whatever?" he asked casually. "But of course. All that needs to be done now is make it official. It is with great pride that I welcome you into the ranks of the Espada. You may be excused until that point in time, unless someone else wishes to challenge our new Primera Espada," he said silkily. No one moved a muscle. Naruto sneered at Eisen, before he brushed his Arenkar jacket off and headed through the gilded doors. The other Arenkar watched him go. The other Espada in particular watched him with fear in their eyes, and they came to the realization that their lives were in danger if there were other challengers even half his level. Well, shit, they all thought. Naruto had retreated to his personal chambers after he had destroyed Eren in battle, and had officially been drafted into the Espada ranks as the new Primera. He lifted up his sleeve, clutching an area which was still red and raw. A black one was tattooed onto his left bicep, a clear reminder of the rank that he held. "Naruto?" came the familiar voice from before. "Ulquiorra? You really have a bad habit of sneaking up on me," Naruto noted, turning to face his right-hand man. The Espada orientation had gone well for the most part, with plenty of the Arankars there taking a rank. Nearly all of the old Espada had been replaced by now, being thrown into the Primera Espada or just outright killed. He didn't stay there for the whole event, but it was likely Baragan was the Segunda Espada now. Ulquiorra was now dressed in the same outfit that Naruto was, but his chest was exposed slightly, revealing the number 4 tattoo that now signified his ranking. All of his former generals had been drafted into the Espada, just like him. While he was the Primera and Ulquiorra was the Cuarta, Haribel herself had taken the Tercera spot. The others were down a little bit lower, though, never having advanced to Vasto Lord class before Arancarization. Neutra was the Octava, Grimjow the Novena, and Sail the Decima. 6 of the Espada had come from the Reino animal, making it the largest change in the Espada ranking system seen so far. Then again, Eisen had stated that the incarnations of the Espada Naruto had seen up there were the original 10, so there would definitely be more changes. Naruto predicted that there would be several changes in rank even among his former men. Neutra and Grimjow would likely move up in time. The new Cuarta Espada said nothing as he walked into the room, standing in front of Naruto, who was sitting on an ottoman next to his plush bed. Naruto stared at him intently, a little apprehensive on what he was about to say. The Bat Arankar leaned in slightly. "The generals of the Reino animal will always be loyal to you," he whispered, and Naruto's eyes narrowed. Ulquiorra had a reputation for being the most loyal general in the Reino animal, but the others weren't so favorable. Haribel was beginning to lose faith in him as a ruler as she began to figure out what he had done over the years. Grimjow and Neutra were pissed at him and thought him weak, but he could easily beat some fear back into them. Sail seemed to be only other one who was still on his side, but he couldn't say for sure. Ulquiorra said nothing more at that moment, but as he walked through the doorway, he said one final thing. "When you are ready to overthrow Eisen, please let me know." Naruto smiled evilly. Unfortunately for Naruto, the day when Naruto could fully overthrow Eisen was a very long way off. He was going to research the effects of Aizen's Shuriken in secret, with the help of Sail. Hopefully, they could find some way to break it together. Already, several months had passed since he and others became Espada in Aizen's army. Grimjow had taken his old friends from his time as an Ajuchas, and made them his fraction. At the moment, Eisen wanted something from him personally, so he was on his way to see what the damned Shinigami wanted. For what seemed like the millionth time, Naruto pulled open the doors to Aizen's throne room and stepped inside. Being the Primera Espada meant he was called on often to lead the palace in the absence of Eisen and his commanders. They were still active captains within Soul Society after all, and weren't ready to reveal themselves to their enemies just yet. Naruto wasn't complaining though. Their absence gave him the perfect opportunity to work in secret on cracking the mystery of Aizen's Shuriken. Eisen was sitting on his throne per usual, and Naruto still couldn't get the picture of an old, skeleton king that once sat on the throne. He at least was a much more reasonable rival. "Welcome, Naruto. I trust you have been having a fine day?" Eisen asked amiably, in a tone that made Naruto want to rip his face off. Naruto grunted in reply, Eisen being unfazed by his rude attitude. He walked up to the base of Aizen's throne, not even bothering to bow. He ignored a pair of eyes that stared at him from the side, apparently appalled by the lack of respect. "As you are no doubt aware, we are constantly training new arrivals in combat so we may better combat Soul Society when the time comes. The influx of Hollow and Arankar from both yours and Baragan's kingdom had been infinitely beneficial, and for that I thank you," he said politely. "Is he mocking me?" Naruto growled in his mind. Eisen didn't seem to notice Naruto's anger, and he continued on with his speech anyway. Normally, I allow my Espada to choose whether or not they will lead Arrancar as part of their fraction. However, there are a few talented Arrancar I feel could be used as Espada in the future if they shine underneath an Espada's tutelage. Consider this more of a request if you will, but I would like you to take on your very own fraction, and train our newest arrival to Las Noches, Eisen finished. Naruto's head shot up, and he almost snarled at his new leader. Was Eisen stupid or something? He was by far the biggest loose cannon in the Espada. There was no guarantee he wouldn't kill his new fraction on the spot. As much as he was loath to admit, he knew it wasn't a request. It was an order, and one he had to obey if he wanted to continue his undercover work on Aizen's Shirkai. If that is your request, Aizen-sama, then I will gladly fulfill it, Naruto spat out in loathing. Eisen knew full well that Naruto hated him, so he didn't comment on it. You may have already noticed the presence of another Arrancar in the room. You may advance into the center of the room. I want you to meet your new superior, Eisen called out, to a figure that was wreathed in shadow in the corner of the room. A young, green-haired Arrancar female walked confidently into the center of the room, her smug expression already flaring Naruto's temper even further. This is our newest Arrancar. We found her wandering the sands of Hueco Mundo outside of Las Noches. Apparently, she wanted to find a way and so she could join our cause. Her name is Nelliel Tuodelschwank, and she'll be your new fraction as of today. Naruto, Eisen said softly. Aizen-sama, if I may protest this decision. Nelliel spoke up. For the first time in a while, Eisen frowned at the outright display of disrespect, but he allowed her to continue. I do not believe a mere child is fit to be my superior in these matters. If he is a member of the Espada, I should hope that their standards will improve over time. She was cut off completely, by a crushing orange reiatsu that slithered into her veins and put a crushing force on every muscle in her body. Her eyes widened, and tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She collapsed onto her knees, and began choking on her own saliva. Her entire form trembled, and her eyes began to water. She gritted her fingers into the ground, and tried desperately to get a hold of herself, to no avail. You're damn lucky you have to be my fraction, or else I would have killed you on the spot, Naruto shouted, as his reiatsu faded, and Nelliel was able to breathe again. Eisen had regained his smile, being very much unaffected by the strong reiatsu that Naruto had emitted. I am not a child. I'm at least twice your age, you stupid brat, so why don't you go off of something other than stupid appearances, little girl, he sneered at her, as she moved her stringy hair that was sopping with sweat out of her face and glared at Naruto. I'm the Primera Espada, which means I'm the highest level Arrancar that Las Noches has to offer. I was also the ruler of the Reino Animal, perhaps you've heard of it. Doesn't matter, the concerns of the Hollow Kingdoms would have been before your time anyway. We're leaving. Follow me back to Primera's chambers, that is where you'll be staying from now on. And I hope you're ready to experience hell, he said to her, after she had fully recovered from the display of reiatsu. Once again, Nelliel glared poisonously at the Primera Espada, and Eisen was left musing over the superior-subordinate relationship that he had just created. They already seemed to have a vitriolic hatred of each other. Several weeks later, and Nelliel was beginning to flourish underneath Naruto's teachings, even if their relationship wasn't the most stable thing around. They still loathed each other entirely, but Nelliel seemed to thrive underneath harsh circumstances, and that was exactly what Naruto's training methods consisted of. Hell was pretty much an accurate word to describe Naruto's training method, and it was pretty obvious that many of Naruto's training methods were thinly veiled attempts to kill her off. Yet, Nelliel survived, and was becoming a far better warrior than she had been before. In fact, all of that rapid growth was beginning to make her cocky and arrogant. The young Arrancar had no respect for anyone around her, including her superiors. Again, Nelliel! Naruto shouted, as Espada and Fraction practiced in the open sands of Hueco Mundo. Nelliel looked a little worse for wear, with several deep burn and cut wounds all over her body. Her Arrancar uniform was in tatters. Can I at least release? She shouted at him. No! He shouted back immediately, before launching another orange Siro at her. The new Arrancar jumped out of the way of the beam, scuffing herself as she fell in the sand. What's the point of me just dodging your Siros? It hardly seems like a civilized way to train me. She argued back at the Primera, who took the time to launch another one. Yeah, that's right. It's not really civilized, isn't it? But, as long as I'm doing this, there's a greater chance that you'll be killed by one of my Siros. He laughed. You Batar! She was cut off by another orange blast. Several hours later, and Nelliel had still not been killed by the Siros that Naruto threw her way. As Naruto charged up one more Siro, he sighed before releasing the energy. Alright, that's enough, Nelliel. Clearly you're not just going to die by getting Siros fired at you. He sounded disappointed. Nelliel fell into line with Naruto, reluctantly waiting her next orders. Let's go, Naruto said sullenly, and Nelliel followed Naruto back into the palace of Las Noches. As they were about to enter Naruto's personal wing of Las Noches, they were halted by a very obnoxious voice. Yo, Naruto! I see you've taken your little bitch out for some training, huh? It asked. Naruto and Nelliel turned around, seeing Neutra and his fraction Tesla standing to the left side of the hallway. Naruto grunted. Ah, don't be such a turd. Why don't you talk to me? I know you've been feeling cranky ever since you got your ass kicked close to a year ago, but you can at least tell me what's going on with your little whore. He shouted. You disrespectful beast. How Eisen-sama made you an Espada is beyond my imagination. You are crude, unrefined, and a miserable excuse for a warrior, Nelliel said. Neutra sneered at her, bringing his face in to tell her off, but Naruto beat him to the punch. Literally. The Primera simply whirled back his fist and smacked Nelliel right in the jaw. The girl flew back several feet, crashing into the wall and creating a sizable crater. Nelliel! Regardless of how you feel about his attitude, the fact remains is that Neutra is an Espada, while you are nothing but a weak, insignificant fraction. You will show respect to him. It wasn't a request. Nelliel scoffed and got to her feet, turning her nose up at Naruto before she ran away off to her own personal chambers, practically spitting in the face of her superior's orders. Damn cunt. She's nothing but trouble, Naruto thought to himself. Meanwhile, Neutra seemed to lose interest in the situation at hand, so he called to Tesla to follow him. Whatever the case, Naruto could tell that Nelliel wasn't fond of Neutra, and that the feeling was mutual. If Nelliel ever became an Espada, things would be very problematic between the two. Naruto grinned as he came to a realization. He may have just found a suitable way to get Neutra back on his side, and away from Eisen. Chapter 36, La Tercera Espada. Neutra. I do not care if you are the Octava Espada. You are not a warrior. You are a beast who loves nothing more than killing. Someone like that will never be able to defeat me, Nelliel said calmly, as she was accosted by Neutra in the hallways of Las Noches. Shut up, Nelliel! All this arrogant talk, this impudent talk, when you are simple fraction garbage. And yet she still tried to talk this way to your superior. Where do you get off doing this? A woman like you in the Arrancar army is a good enough excuse for me to target you. A true fool, Nelliel muttered, much to the ire of Neutra. He growled like a wild animal, and held his scythe-like Zanpakuto out in front of him in a clear sign of an attack. That's it, I've had enough of your crap. I'm just gonna kill you right now, so just try and see how you fare against me and see if I'm able to defeat you, Neutra shouted, brandishing his scythe. Nelliel nodded in understanding, having seen this coming for a while now. Ever since she had become the fraction of the Primera Espada, she had been targeted by the Octava almost constantly. 2 years had passed since the day she first met him, and he had never stopped hating her. And it looked like now was the time when he had finally snapped, and was fully ready to kill her. She drew her Zanpakuto and held it in front of her, unknowingly telegraphing her attacks as she thought of how she was going to defeat Neutra. Neutra, being the far more experienced fighter, picked up on that easily. She was consistently looking at his unguarded left side, and her Zanpakuto was raised to go for an attack to that angle. She was all too easy to read. With great strength, he swung his Zanpakuto at the girl, and the two blades clanged against each other again and again, Nelliel's katana hardly holding up against Neutra's scythe. Sparks flew as Nelliel went in for a slash that would have taken off Neutra's head, but it was blocked by the concave part of Neutra's crescent scythe. Neutra switched his grip on his Zanpakuto, sliding it down the blade of Nelliel's own in an attempt to lift it out of her hand. The female Arrancar smartly pulled out after that moment, taking time to readjust her grip to avoid having her sword get pulled from her hands. She dodged to the left as Neutra tried an upward strike. He hopped into the air with surprising agility after that, angling his side downward, trying to use gravity to obliterate his opponent. He got his blade stuck in the ground, but with his kind of strength he had dislodged it within a second, giving Nelliel no time to counterattack. Nelliel still rushed in, ignorantly thinking that she had still created an opening. "You're open!" she shouted, as she too jumped in the air with greater agility, swinging her Zanpakuto at a much wider angle. Neutra smirked before he threw his arms open as if he was going to embrace that attack. Nelliel winced and hesitated at the unorthodox move, something that would cost her, though she still went in for the attack anyway. It was less powerful than it would have been, because now her strike was plagued by hesitation and doubt. She slashed her Zanpakuto down his torso, shocked as she saw sparks begin flying from where the blade made contact. When she was done, Neutra hadn't even flinched, and instead of his body being in tatters, her blade had been dented instead. She grunted, and tried to get away from Neutra's range, but she was far too slow. Her lackluster attack had made her open instead, after what was now an obvious feint attack by Neutra. She hung in the air with bated breath, until Neutra thrust his weapon forward and caught her in the shoulder, sending the new recruit flying back. Neutra retracted the weapon, hissing with satisfaction at his success. Nelliel screamed in pain as she clutched her deeply wounded shoulder. Her Zanpakuto clattered to the ground uselessly as she squirmed in the sand. It would be a total loss in her favor if she couldn't figure out how to fight with that injury. She wouldn't have time to think, because Neutra was already speeding towards her as fast he could, his scythe outstretching for the killing. With her adrenaline kicking into overdrive, she grabbed her Zanpakuto and blocked the downward swing. Her katana broke in half after that, but she at least avoided the fatal blow. While Neutra was recovering from the recoil, Nelliel used Sonito to disappear and tried to make her escape from the rabid Arrancar. She popped onto a roof and fell to her knees, the wound acting up again. "Oi, you! Get your bitch-ass back here, Nelliel!" Neutra shouted in his raspy voice, after spotting Nelliel on the rooftop. He ran over to her position, but Nelliel sped away. Fortunately for her, Neutra wasn't really that fast, and she could easily outmaneuver him even in her injured state. "Where the hell are you?" he asked, as Nelliel hid in the rafters of a dome outside Neutra's personal chambers. She watched him down there rapidly searching for her, before he placed a hand on the ground. Nelliel gasped. Pesquisa, she thought, as she clutched the marble she was holding on to. Her position wouldn't last as a valid hiding spot. She would have to get into the main portion of Las Noches, where fighting wasn't tolerated. As quietly as she could, she jumped down from the rafters, wincing from her injured shoulder. There was an open door across the desert plain that led to the main foyer of Las Noches, and she could probably outspeed Neutra to get there. With her speed, she reached it 5 minutes later, effectively cutting off her pursuer from reaching her. He wouldn't dare attack her now, but the fact remained that she was in danger around Neutra. Whenever she stepped out into the open, she would have to watch her back for any potential attack from him. "I need to go to Naruto and demand more training. At this rate I'm going to get killed by him if I don't make it into the Espada and outrank Neutra." She wandered the halls of Las Noches interior in a slump, wondering if she should seek out some treatment for the injury that she received from Neutra. The medical wing was far away though. She was in the chamber where Eisen and the Espada held their meetings. Naruto's, and by extension her personal chambers, were directly next to this building. She gasped as the double doors to the Espada meeting hall had opened. Apparently there had been some kind of conference between Eisen and an individual Espada rather than the whole group. As luck would have it, the Espada Eisen seemed to be having a conference with was her commanding Espada, though whether that was lucky or unlucky was in the eye of the beholder. She winced as both of her superiors laid eyes upon her, annoyed confusion on Naruto's face as well as amused confusion on Eisen's. Naruto briskly walked up to her, before he backhanded her casually. "Why," he hissed, as he glared down at the fallen Arrancar with nothing but hatred. Nelliel gasped for breath as she clutched her scuffed cheek. That blow had penetrated her hierro. "Is my fraction so weak that she'd show up to me injured? Who's the opponent you crawled away from shamefully this time?" he asked, his abusive nature overriding anything else. Eisen watched the hideous display between Espada and Fraction with a mirthful smile, not even once thinking about whether or not he should help Nelliel. Rather, he was focusing on his strongest Arrancar himself. He supposed that Naruto had changed quite a bit since the fall of his kingdom and his subsequent induction into the Espada. The rumors he had heard of Naruto were of a very violent and brutal, yet usually jovial fellow. Naruto loved to smile, even when he was disemboweling his unsuspecting victims. Nowadays he had a far surlier disposition, rarely ever smiling unless it was an opponent who could grab his attention. Eisen supposed the loss of his kingdom was to blame for the personality change. It was Neutra, she whispered to herself, so that Naruto could just barely hear it. Naruto's mood seemed to take a 180 after that, and he began chuckling. "I see. I expected as much. It's a good thing he's making your life as miserable as possible, now isn't it?" He sneered at his fraction, before he reached out his hand. "Get up." He grabbed her long green hair, getting a firm grip on her tresses before he tugged her mercilessly to her feet. It almost looked out of place, as Nelliel was quite a bit taller than Naruto. She cried out in pain as Naruto dragged her along the hall, not mindful of her injuries in the least. No matter how hard she seemed to struggle, his grip never loosened. The young Arrancar continued to protest all the way back to Naruto's personal quarters, where Naruto finally let go of her hair at the door to hers. She fell to her knees, clutching her scalp where Naruto had almost ripped out her hair by its roots. "Now, Nelliel, do you understand why you lost to Neutra?" he asked firmly. Nelliel glared at him through her green hair, digging her fingernails into the marble ground. "Because you're not giving me enough training," she blurted out, before she instantly regretted that sentence. Naruto glared at her ferociously, before he released his spiritual pressure, effectively cutting off Nelliel's breathing. He swung his right foot back in a wide arc, before he clipped Nelliel in the cheek in a sharp kick, propelling the kneed Arrancar into the wall behind her, creating a small crater. He turned his back to her, still glaring at the crater he made in the wall. "Okay, Nelliel, I'll tell you why you lost to him. It's not because my training is lacking or anything, it's simply because you are weak. If I had any other Arrancar underneath my command, they would be thriving, and at the very least be an Espada by now. Yet you still can't even keep up with the Octava. Pathetic," he sneered. Nelliel gurgled blood, and the red liquid spilled over onto her Arrancar uniform. She looked up to Naruto, her expression unreadable. Naruto stared back. "If you're so eager to get harsher training though, I'd be more than happy to oblige," he said evilly, as Nelliel could only wonder what she had just gotten herself into. That grin on his face never, ever meant anything good. 3 days later, after her wounds had almost completely healed, she and Naruto were facing opposite each other on the sands directly outside the palace. Naruto's jaw was set and stony, as rigid as one of the quartz trees that littered the Hueco Mundo desert. Nelliel tried to look emotionless, but on the inside she was nervous. She had no idea what Naruto had in store for her. They stared each other for a little while longer, and after one sonito, Naruto had flashed out of existence. Nelliel drew her sword, and as soon as she did, Naruto appeared and kicked it out of her hands. The Zanpakuto twirled in the air and became stuck in the sand a distance away from the battlefield, but Naruto had already grasped Nelliel by the throat, choking her tightly. "This isn't training, this is a fight," she thought to herself, as the training was far more brutal than even Naruto's worst training methods. Now, he was actively trying to kill her. He used his free hand to charge up a Siro, which at this point-blank range would obliterate her head and leave nothing of it left. She cried out as she placed her hands over his, and began kicking in order to try and loosen herself. She managed to free herself eventually, but not before Naruto gave her a hero-coated backhand through the head. Nelliel knew already that he wasn't going to use his Zanpakuto. He seemed to throw her to the position where her Zanpakuto landed, so she was fortunate enough to be able to recover it. She grabbed and dislodged it from the sand, before she used Sonito to try and get a few quick slashes in on Naruto. Like with Neutra, his strong hero tanked them all easily, and he didn't even bother trying to dodge it. Instead, he brought his head back and performed a headbutt, their masks meeting one another. She clutched her head and jumped back away from her opponent. She held her Zanpakuto horizontally at arm's length, as she rubbed the blade. It began to glow with a magenta Ryatsu. Declare. She was cut off as Naruto appeared before her, grasping her blade in his right hand and wresting it from her grasp before she could release. It fell into the sand again, as Naruto charged up twin Siros from his index fingers that he intended to fire at Nelliel. "Damn it!" she shouted, as she was completely outclassed. It was no surprise really, she was already completely outclassed by the Octava Espada. The Primera was in a league of his own. She used Sonito to get as far away from her commanding officer as possible, making sure to use it as much as possible to keep him on edge. He released one of his Siros, the beam just missing her as she flashed away. The other one missed completely. Naruto watched forlornly as she disappeared into the night. He wasn't even going to bother chasing her and finishing her off. He liked killing games, not chasing games. He smirked in the direction that Nelliel had run in, before he nonchalantly turned his back and walked back into the palace. Nelliel stood in the darkness of the Primera Espada's room, watching over the young-looking Arrancar as he slept. He looked remarkably peaceful while he slept, a stark contrast to what he was like when he was awake. She drew her Zanpakuto slowly, making sure she didn't make enough noise that would potentially wake Naruto. She winced as the sword gleamed in the dark, but she held it in front of her anyway. She growled as she remembered the abuses she went through during her time underneath Naruto's service. She never wanted that to happen to her ever again. She readied her sword in a downward stabbing position, prepared to stab her Zanpakuto right into his foul head. She grunted softly as she thrust forward, before the blade was halted in its track by a hand that shot out from underneath the covers and grabbed the blade in mid-attack. She gasped, as she looked down and saw two red eyes looking directly at her, glaring at her intently. "Hello, Nelliel. Fancy meeting you here," Naruto said casually, with an undertone of hate in that voice of his. Nelliel grimaced, and wedged the sword free from his grasp. She yelled out a war cry, before she rushed in with the intent to kill. The sword was knocked from her hands easily. "Nelliel, I once ran a kingdom where a good portion of the populace conspired to kill me. If you thought I didn't sleep with one eye open, then frankly you're an idiot," Naruto said calmly. "You," Nelliel said. "I thought our little training session would have made it clear that I've disowned you as my fraction. I don't care if Eisen wants me to train you to become an Espada. My patience with you has run out," he shouted, turning on the light in his room. "You're so pathetic that you aren't even worth killing. Become an Espada, and then we'll talk. Or fight, as I should say. Become the Segunda for God's sake, and then challenge me for the Primera spot. I'll enjoy crushing my former fraction then, because right now it's clear that you'll do nothing but run away from me," he stated as an afterthought, as Nelliel was already in the doorway. "I'll become stronger on my own, Naruto. It's clear that you are not going to help me grow stronger, you never have. All you've done is abuse me and try to kill me. These past 2 years have been miserable. I swear, I'll become stronger than Neutra, and stronger than you. I will take the Primera spot for myself, and end your life." "That I promise," she said, her face stained with tears. The young Arrancar tripped over her own 2 feet, before she sped off down the hall before Naruto could chase her. "Welcome to the Espada, Nelliel," said Eisen politely, as the large number 3 was etched into her back while she was sitting at the Espada table. Overall, she looked proud of herself, having ascended to Tercera Espada all on her own, now being inferior to only Naruto and Baragan. The other Espada were looking a little downtrodden, as most of them had been moved down a rank with Nelliel's recent addition into the Espada. Sail had been ejected from the group completely. For she did not enter through way of challenge. Her skills had been recognized by Eisen himself, and she was awarded the rank based on that alone. Out of all the Espada, though, none of them looked angrier than Naruto himself. Although he was the Primera, and Nelliel was the Tercera and would still be little match for him, she would most likely become a thorn in his side sometime in the near future. It didn't help that she didn't fit in his ideal vision of what his Espada were going to look like. All of his former generals had been bumped down a rank, and Sale had been booted from the group completely. Okiura, now the Quinta Espada, stole a glance at Naruto. Haribel, now the Quarta, did the same. Even they didn't look happy about this turn of events. Neutra and Grimjow were fuming, however, Neutra because of how much he despised Nelliel, and Grimjow because he was now the lowest ranked Espada. Naruto didn't pay much attention to the topic of the monthly Espada meeting, as he was too busy focusing on what kind of threat Nelliel would become to him. The obvious solution would be to just get rid of her now, but that would leave too much of a mess and Eisen wouldn't be very happy about that. Maybe I can get Neutra to help me on this, and Sale too. I doubt he's very happy after he's been booted from the Espada. He'll obviously be looking for any way to reclaim his spot, he thought. The sooner they did something about Nelliel the better. You are dismissed. Eisen droned on, and Naruto turned to look at him. He had been spacing out for so long that he didn't even hear Eisen dismiss them. Hopefully, he would be able to get to Neutra soon. A month later, and Naruto had walked the halls in a foul mood. Numeros bowed to him respectfully as he passed, and Naruto thanked him by bisecting him horizontally. Was that one of Barrigan's fraction? Oh well, I doubt he'll miss that one much anyway. I know how much of a pain fraction can be, he said out loud. He had made progress on getting Sale to help with the Nelliel case, but Neutra was being as stubborn as ever. He challenged Nelliel to a fight just about every day now, and he always lost. Come to think of it, she doesn't bring her lame pals to those fights anymore. Maybe she's grown confident to go alone to this sort of deal anyway, he said before he noticed three shadows wandering down the hallway in front of him. Well, speak of the Diablo, he whispered to himself, as he noticed just who it was. Nelliel was walking down the hall at that moment, her kiss-ass lackeys following right behind her. Going somewhere? He asked as she passed by him, her fraction scurrying ahead of her to get some distance between them. Pesh and Dondo Chaka. He thought that was what their names were. Nelliel huffed lightly. That is none of your business, she said, before she caught sight of the Arrancar corpse that she saw splattered all over the hall. Did you do that? She asked, almost a little angry at his actions. Naruto raised an eyebrow, before he huffed and nodded. Just killing anyone you feel like. You're a wild animal, not a... Yes, Avit. I know you like to get off by giving this speech, but I don't care if you think I'm a warrior, or a wild animal, or whatever. All I care about is the fact that I know I could whoop your bitch ass so hard you wouldn't be able to sit down for a year. He taunted. Nelliel turned around, and almost drew her sword. Oh? What's this, now? You want to hang with the big dogs now, do ya? Don't you have smaller fish to go after or something? I mean, you go out of your way to fight one every damn day. And to think you claim to hate battling. He shook his head, his tone taking a mock scolding. What did you dash? She shouted before a hand darted in front of her, blocking her path. Pesh, she said. Please just ignore it. Nel-sama. He is doing nothing more than taunting you into a fight at the moment. It's not worth it to fight with the likes of him. Pesh reasoned. The three Arrancar turned their backs to Naruto, with Nelliel throwing one last cold look his way. Naruto couldn't resist getting in one more taunt to her. Yeah, just run away, little Tercera. But always remember that big, bad Primera is gonna get ya. He cackled, bursting into peals of laughter, as he saw Nelliel wince subconsciously. Naruto knew better than to just go off on his own though. He knew exactly where she was going, and what was going to happen next. He didn't wait any longer, so in a quick flash, he was gone. He reappeared on a roof outside the main foyer of Las Noches, where the artificial sky gave light to anything underneath the dome. He honestly hated that little bit of renovation that Eisen did, but then again he hated everything that Eisen did. He had smothered his Ryatsu to make him undetectable, and hid in the rafters of the closest building he could find, where he was watching Nelliel and Neutra down below. It looked like they were about to fight. Naruto watched on in silence as Neutra rushed Nelliel, but she was just too fast to him to outmaneuver. Repeatedly, he kept getting thrown in the wall of building he was resting on. "Okay, we're done here," Nelliel said as she sheathed her sword. "I'm glad we finished up in time for lunch. Those two will begin to worry if I'm out here too long." Naruto drowned out the following speech, which Nelliel always made after she had defeated Neutra. He had heard it several times before. It was always about how they regained logical minds when they became Arrancar. And logical minds needed a reason to fight. And you lack that. I do not have a reason to fight you, and therefore I have no obligation to finish you off. What a crock of shit. Big words coming from a bitch who couldn't even stand up to Neutra a decade or two ago. Naruto thought from his perch. Neutra seemed to have had enough as well. I have a reason. I hate you. Nelliel sighed. That's not a reason. That's instinct. You are an animal. I don't recognize you as a warrior, and that means you're not someone I have to fight. I don't feel like being burdened with taking the life of someone who's not even a warrior, she finished. And there it is. The same telegraphed speech every time. Don't you see, Nelliel? We're all animals here, not warriors. Even you. If you were really as righteous and logical as you claim to be, you wouldn't even be holding this grudge against me. If you don't get rid of that retarded philosophy of yours and embrace your inner animal, you'll never be able to beat me, let alone challenge me. Naruto thought. Nelliel had already walked away, and Naruto snapped himself out of his thoughts to witness the perfect opportunity to get rid of Nelliel. If things went right, she would fall behind in strength, and simultaneously he would regain Neutra's loyalty. If things went wrong, he could still pin the blame on Neutra for Nelliel's disappearance/death. It was perfect. Neutra was already conversing with his own fraction, Tesla, when Naruto jumped from his perch and landed right beside him, his coattails flapping behind him. Tesla balked at the appearance of the strongest Espada, and backed away sweating. Neutra didn't look too happy to see him. What you do want, Naruto? He sneered. Despite the disrespect, Naruto smiled. I have a proposition for you, Neutra. Later that day, Nelliel just couldn't find her fraction. Peshquatish and Dando Chaka burst in. She had looked high and low for them all over her personal sector, but they were just nowhere to be found. And it was right in time for dinner as well. Pesh. Dando Chaka, she called, as she stepped out in the main sands of Las Noches, where Neutra was brandishing his scythe as her menacingly. Looking for something? He asked. That's none of your business. Nelliel responded before she passed Neutra. Carrying your weapon around like that is just a threat. If you want to appear strong, keep it hidden while you're walking around, she lectured to Neutra, who only smiled deviously. Just as Nelliel had walked past Neutra, there was a massive explosion, and the wall right beside them crumbled to pieces. From the opening of the wall spilled two particular Arrancar. Though, it was generous if you could even call them Arrancar anymore. Pesh. Dando Chaka. Nelliel gasped out in horror at what she saw before her. Besides their grievous injuries, there was something else very striking about the two fraction. I'm very sorry, and Nelsama, Pesh managed to gasp out, though what he was apologizing for, Nelliel didn't know. She looked up to Neutra in horror, her temper getting much more ignited at the sight of him. You completely tore off their masks, didn't you? She asked, almost ready to throw up at the unspeakable act amongst hollows. It was the worst crime imaginable. How could you? She screamed. So what? Those two were weak, Neutra said casually, before he swung his side Zanpakuto at her. Nelliel drew her sword in response to that, blocking the attack. How about it? I gave you a reason to fight me. Neutra roared. No. Nelliel began, as the two combatants broke off from each other. This isn't a reason to fight, but you've hurt people that were very dear to me, she whispered. And you're going to pay for it, she said, as she rushed Neutra, her sword at the ready. She forced the Octava into the back wall, before she kicked him forcefully, breaking the wall and sending him to the sands below. Once down there, Neutra blocked a few more strikes from her, before he jumped over her and purposely let himself open. Too slow, Nelliel shouted as she slashed at him. The second she hit skin though, Neutra vanished into thin air. Nelliel's eyes widened in surprise, and she looked around frantically for her opponent, but before she could, her mask and scalp were cracked open. Neutra stood over the injured Nelliel, before he scoffed and grabbed the unconscious Arrancar by the scruff of her neck. A few minutes later, and he was standing on the balcony of Las Noches, the perpetual night of the desert watching over him. He leaned in over the edge, 3 bodies being dragged along beside him. "What do you want?" "Your job's done, Sail Aporo," he said, as the pink-haired Arrancar made himself visible from the shadows. Sail smiled lightly. "Don't say that, we're comrades who work together to further the same ambitions, and we've known each other a long time, what with Naruto and all. At least let me observe the subject until the experiment ends." "I don't remember sharing any of your ambitions, loser. Besides, everyone knows you're only doing this so you can get your old position in the Espada back. You, who were booted from the Espada for being too weak. It was coincidence that our interests overlapped for a moment," Neutra explained. "We worked together so that you could fight against Nelliel and I could conduct research on a new device, and then of course there was that incident with he was cut off." "Are you two quite finished? All 3 of us know the real reason why we're getting rid of Nelliel," came Naruto's voice, as he too emerged from the shadows. "I set this up for both of you, Neutra, Sail Aporo. I made it so you could fight Nelliel and you could reclaim your position in the Espada," he said to Neutra and Sail respectively. "I never did figure out why you wanted her gone so badly, Naruto," Sail admitted. "Idiot! It's because she doesn't fit into the ideal Espada," he began. Neutra and Sail Aporo looked at him quizzically, like they didn't know what to expect. "Anyone could figure out that she's Eisen's golden child right now. He wants her to replace me as the next Primera. But even her position of the Tercera is not beneficial to any of us. She wasn't around when me and Barragan ruled Hueco Mundo. She's completely loyal to Eisen, and that's a problem. I need the Espada stocked with members who won't be loyal to Eisen, and Nelliel definitely doesn't fit the bill here." "Heh! Sounds to me like you're just afraid of her," added Neutra. "You would think that, wouldn't you, Neutra? After you needed Sail Aporo's device to get the jump on her, you're a giant fucking hypocrite. I gave you the means to fight Nelliel. I expect you to kill her once she recovers from that wound," Naruto said. Yeah, I got it," Neutra said before he dropped the 3 unconscious Arrancar into the chasm. They hit the sand with a remarkable thud. "Nelliel, what separates us is experience, not strength. I will surpass you before you recover from that wound and return to Las Noches. I'll become so great that your sword will never be able to reach me. If Neutra kills her instead of me, he'll take the fall from Eisen. Not to mention, if I make it look like I'm targeting Arrancar with an intense loyalty to Eisen, one who has no history with me, then that makes me look suspicious. Not to mention..." "Hey, Neutra! I hope you remember the details of our deal. I set it up so you could fight Nelliel, and you know what I get out of it, right? I hope you're not thinking of double-crossing me," he whispered the last part lowly, as some of his Ryatsu began to leak out. Yeah, I got it already. I'll be loyal to you again. Don't worry about it," Neutra said with a hand wave. Directly after that happened, an explosion of pink Ryatsu occurred down below, where Nelliel and her fraction were deposited. After the dust and Ryatsu faded, Nelliel looked a little different. Overall, she was reminiscent of a 3-year-old child. "She turned into a kid?" Neutra said in wonder. Sail Aporo adjusted his glasses, looking down at the new Arrancar intently. "Fascinating. I've never seen this phenomenon before. Perhaps her Ryatsu flowed out from her broken mask, making her spiritual form shrink in size, or... Who cares how it happened?" Neutra cackled, as he stared down at the child. "You're pathetic, Nelliel. That body suits you perfectly," he said before the happiness faded from his tone. "It looks like our blades will never clash again. That's the only bad thing about this, Nelliel." Neutra took his leave at that moment, Sail Aporo following directly behind him. Naruto watched them go for a little while longer, before he turned to watch the 3 Arrancar down there for a little longer. He sat on one of the pillars of Las Noches, contemplating how his plan worked out. It looks like I won't have to have Neutra kill you after all. With that new body down there, you're as good as dead. You'll be in no shape to reclaim your position as the Tercera, Nelliel, and even if you did, I will have already transcended your complete potential. He noted before he hopped off the pillar and returned to the main foyer of Las Noches. Down at the base of Las Noches, the child that was once Nelliel II Odelschwank fluttered open her eyes, her memory shredded and forgotten of the recent trauma. Where am I? She squeaked in a childish, toddler voice, as she looked around and spotted the 2 other Arrancar she had fallen down with. Who are you 2? She asked. Did she lose her memories? Pesh wondered, as Dando Chaka gasped right beside him. The little girl muttered, my head hurts, and Dando Chaka couldn't handle it anymore. Pesh, he exclaimed, reaching out a hand like he wanted to touch the child. Don't panic, Dando Chaka, Pesh whispered. There's only one path that we can take now. Nel-sama. Nelliel II Odelschwank-sama is dead. With her mask broken, her powers robbed, and her memories lost, she is dead. The person in front of us is no longer Nel-sama. Therefore, we must protect her, he continued. Dando Chaka looked at him in wonder. Nel-sama hated fighting, so in a way, we're going to give her the life she always wished her. We'll protect her from pain, from hardship, and all other types of suffering. We'll protect her now that she's weak, even if it costs us our lives. Protect her, he trailed off, before his voice gained another air of confidence. Protect her from Neutra Gilga. And Sail Aporo Grands. And he trailed off again, as tears began pouring from his maskless eyes. Dando Chaka looked at him in concern, as Pesh grit his teeth. And Naruto Uzumaki.